Back in 2019, Neuralink dropped a paper that honestly felt like something out of science fiction. It laid out this wild new plan to plug computers straight into the human brain. So today, we're going to tear that paper apart and really dig into the breakthrough system they came up with. This question, how do you actually do that? It's been this huge engineering puzzle for a long time. We're not just talking about software and hardware here. The real problem, the thing that stumped everyone, was how do you connect something hard and electronic to something soft and, well, alive, like the brain? And that's where this 2019 paper comes in. What we're looking at here is their proposal for a full-on system. It was designed to tackle all those roadblocks, with the ultimate goal of making these brain-machine interfaces, or BMIs, a real thing in hospitals and clinics.
All right, so let's get into it. What was the big problem they were trying to solve here? Why was this so hard?
The promise of BMIs is just mind-blowing, right? Helping people who are paralyzed move again, or giving sight back to the blind. But the paper makes it really clear that the reality, at the time, was a whole different story. The tech that existed was just too clunky, too risky to actually use on a large scale. It couldn't handle enough data, and frankly, it often caused more harm than good.
And this slide really gets to the core of it. The old way of doing things used these stiff electrodes, usually made of silicon. Think about it. It's like trying to stick a tiny, rigid piece of rebar into a bowl of Jell-O. That massive mismatch between the hard probe and the soft brain tissue, it just wreaked havoc. It caused physical damage, our own immune systems would attack it, and the devices just didn't last very long. So what Neuralink put on the table wasn't just, hey, here's a slightly better electrode. No. They proposed an entire integrated system. It was like they took the whole problem, threw it out, and started from scratch, designing something to solve all those old limitations at the same time.
And that word, high fidelity, is absolutely key. The real goal of a top-tier BMI isn't just to pick up some vague, staticky noise from the brain. It's about listening in on the specific conversations between individual neurons. It's like going from hearing the roar of a crowd to picking out a single person's whisker. That's the difference a high-bandwidth interface makes. So their solution was this brilliant three-part combo. It wasn't just one thing, but three separate innovations that all had to work together perfectly. First, you have these incredibly fine, flexible electrodes they called threads. Second, a special robot to actually put them in the brain. And third, a custom-built chip to handle the absolute flood of data coming from them.
Okay, let's dive into that first piece of the puzzle, the electrodes, the threads. This is really where their answer to that whole stiff probe problem starts.
The big leap forward here was all about the materials. Remember that rebar and Jell-O problem? Well, instead of that, Neuralink came up with these super thin, flexible threads made of a polymer. The whole idea was to create something that could move with the brain, not fight against it, something that would cause way less damage and hopefully fly under the radar of the body's immune system.
And the scale they were talking about is just wild. We're talking 4 to 6 micrometers thick. To put that in perspective, that is way thinner than a single strand of your hair. And yet, crammed onto that tiny thread are 32 separate electrodes. Then you bundle up to 96 of these threads together, and suddenly you have over 3,000 individual channels listening in on the brain. The density is just incredible.
Okay, but wait, this brings up a pretty obvious problem, right? If these threads are as thin and floppy as a piece of cooked spaghetti, how on earth do you get them into the brain precisely? You can't just push on them, they just buckle. And that's where the second part of their big idea comes in, a neurosurgical robot. The paper perfectly describes it as a high-tech sewing machine for the brain. It's a machine designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to handle these ridiculously delicate threads and place them with a speed and precision that, let's be honest, no human hand could ever match. And talk about speed, this thing was designed to be fast. We're talking about inserting 6 threads, which is 192 electrodes per minute. That kind of speed is what takes this from a cool lab experiment to something you could actually imagine being a scalable medical procedure. So here's how it works. The robot uses this teeny tiny needle, just 24 micrometers wide, to grab a little loop on the end of a thread. It's like threading a needle, but on a microscopic scale. Then it zips over to the right spot, pushes the thread down to the exact depth needed, and then pulls back out, leaving that soft, flexible thread right where it needs to be. It's incredibly elegant. So you see, the robot isn't just some cool gadget they added on. It's the absolute linchpin of the whole system. Without it, the flexible threads are useless. It completely solves that cooked spaghetti problem. And get this, it's smart enough to use computer vision to steer clear of blood vessels on the brain's surface, which is just crucial for making the whole thing safer. All right, so we've got our threads in the brain thanks to our robotic sewing machine, but now we have a totally new problem. You've got thousands of channels all screaming data at you at once. It's like trying to take a sip from a fire hose. How in the world do you process all that information in real time? Well, you can't just slap a regular computer chip in there. It would be way too big and it would use a ton of power, which is a big no-no for something inside your head. So this brings us to part 3 of the system. Neuralink made their own custom chip. It's called an ASIC, which stands for Application-Specific Integrated Circuit. Basically, it's a chip built from the ground up to do one thing and one thing only. Grab those tiny neural signals, clean them up, turn them into digital data, and do it all with crazy efficiency. In fact, the paper details a couple of different versions of their setup, but just look at System B here. We're talking over 3,000 channels of data, all processed in a tiny package that's not much bigger than a postage stamp, and it does all that using less power than a dim light bulb. The sheer density of what's happening in that tiny space is just staggering. The whole electronic package is just this masterclass in making things small and efficient. All the heavy lifting, boosting the signal, converting it to digital, it all happens right there on the implant. And in the version they talked about in the paper, all of that raw, uncompressed data from every single one of those thousands of channels, plus all the power it needs, was handled by a single USB-C cable. It's just so slick. So you've got the threads, the robot, and the chip. It's a beautiful system, on paper at least. But the million-dollar question is, did any of it actually work? Well, the paper laid out some pretty impressive results from their animal studies. They talked about something called spiking yield, which is basically a measure of how many electrodes are actually doing their job. And they were getting yields as high as 70%. That means on their best implants, 7 out of every 10 electrodes were successfully picking up those clear, distinct signals from individual neurons. That's a really solid hit rate. And this quote really brings everything full circle, right back to the original promise. What they were saying is, look, with this kind of data quality and quantity, it's no longer just science fiction. It is actually plausible to imagine a patient with a spinal cord injury being able to use this to control a mouse and keyboard just with their mind. So when you look back at it, this 2019 paper was really a foundational moment. It brought together these huge advances in materials, robotics, and microelectronics into one single cohesive system. It was a massive leap forward. And of course, it just leaves you with that one big question. If this is what they showed us back then, what does the future really hold?